The research station Asterion drifted in a slow, deliberate orbit above a vast blue gas giant whose storms moved in spirals larger than continents. From the observation corridor, the planet looked almost peaceful, but Marcus knew the truth. Atmospheric winds there could tear apart armored cruisers, and lightning storms sometimes lasted for weeks. He found the sight comforting in a strange way. It reminded him that the universe was immense, unpredictable, and far too busy to worry about the minor anxieties of one human researcher who still occasionally forgot where he had left his coffee mug. He had been assigned to the Linguistic Integration Wing, a quiet sector of the station where the walls shimmered faintly with projected symbols from hundreds of alien languages. The air always carried a faint hum, like distant singing, produced by the translation cores that process patterns day and night. Marcus enjoyed it. The place felt alive, as if the echoes of civilizations were whispering just beyond hearing. On his first day, he was told he would be working with a Scythian linguist named Kyreth. The name meant nothing to him at the time, and he expected the usual formal introduction, perhaps a confident scholar surrounded by assistants. Instead, he found a single figure standing near a projection table, studying a rotating cluster of glyphs. At first glance, Kyreth looked almost human. She had the same general proportions, the same expressive hands, the same thoughtful stillness of someone deep in concentration. But as she turned slightly, Marcus noticed the long, elegant ears that curved gently backward along her head, delicate and unmistakably alien. Her eyes were focused on the glyphs, and when Marcus approached, she seemed so absorbed that she did not notice him until he cleared his throat. She startled as if someone had dropped a tray of glass behind her. The projection flickered, and several symbols scattered across the air. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quickly. "I didn't mean to. Well, I did mean to interrupt, but not like that." Kyreth blinked, clearly trying to recover. When she spoke, her voice was so soft that Marcus instinctively leaned closer, thinking he had misheard. Hello," she said. The translator in Marcus's ear hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if even it struggled to catch her words. "I'm Marcus Hale," he said gently. "I think we're supposed to work together." Kyreth nodded, her gaze dropping almost immediately to the floor. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and Marcus became acutely aware of the faint humming of the translation cores and the distant vibration of the station's engines. He tried again. "So, what are we working on today?" Kyreth hesitated, then gestured toward the projection. "Early trade dialects from the Peloran fringe," she said, still barely above a whisper. "They overlap structurally with pre-collapse Scythian." Marcus looked at the symbols rotating in the air. They resembled twisting strands of light, rearranging themselves in complex patterns. He frowned thoughtfully, then said, "Ah, of course, Peloran trade dialects." He had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. Kyreth seemed to notice his expression, and after a pause, quietly began explaining the structure of the language. As she spoke, something changed. Her voice remained soft, but her words became precise and fluid, her hands moving through the air as she manipulated the projections. Marcus realized he was watching someone completely different from the nervous figure who had startled moments earlier. Here was confidence, clarity, and brilliance. At one point, Marcus attempted to repeat a phrase in the Peloran dialect. The result sounded to his ears reasonably accurate. To Kyreth, it apparently sounded like a malfunctioning engine attempting to sneeze. She covered her mouth, her eyes widening in alarm, clearly trying not to laugh. "It was that bad, wasn't it?" Marcus said. Kyreth hesitated, then nodded very slightly. "Well," Marcus sighed, "at least I didn't accidentally propose marriage to a cargo freighter. I did that once in a docking bay on Europa." Kyreth blinked. "You did?" "No," Marcus admitted, "but I was close, very close." A small, unexpected sound escaped her, soft, breathy, unmistakably a laugh. She looked startled by it, as if laughter were something that happened to other people. The hours passed quietly after that. Marcus found that Kyreth worked with an intensity that made time seem irrelevant. She could stare at a fragment of text for 10 minutes without moving, then suddenly rearrange an entire translation structure in seconds, as if the solution had been waiting patiently for her to notice it. Yet whenever someone from another department entered the room, She seemed to shrink slightly, her shoulders tightening, her voice fading almost to silence. Marcus began to notice the pattern. Kyreth was fearless in the world of idea, but deeply uncertain in the presence of people. Late in the evening, the station lights dimmed to simulate night cycle. Most of the linguistic wing emptied, leaving only the soft glow of projections and the distant rumble of maintenance drones moving through the ventilation shafts. Marcus stretched and glanced at Kyreth. She was still working, her long ears angled slightly backward in concentration, her eyes reflecting the shifting symbols. "You ever stop?" he asked. She looked up, clearly surprised by the question. "Stop? Sleep," Marcus clarified. "Eat. Remember that gravity exists." "I forget sometimes," she admitted. Marcus chuckled. "That makes two of us, though I usually remember when I walk into a wall." Kyreth tilted her head slightly, as if trying to determine whether he was serious. "I'm serious," Marcus said. "There's a corner in Corridor C that has personally defeated me 3 times." Another small laugh escaped her, softer than before but warmer. Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching the silent dance of alien symbols in the air. And for the first time since arriving on Astarion, he felt completely at ease. The vastness of the universe no longer felt intimidating. It felt interesting. Across the table, Kyreth returned to her work, but Marcus noticed something subtle. Her posture was a little less tense, her movements a little less hurried, as if the quiet companionship in the room had made the silence feel less heavy. Outside the observation window, the gas giant's storms continued to turn, silent and immense. While inside the station, 2 researchers sat surrounded by the voices of 1,000 forgotten worlds. Unaware that this quiet evening was the beginning of a story neither of them yet understood. The night cycle on Astarion had a peculiar stillness to it. The day shift carried a steady background of footsteps, distant conversations, and the occasional clatter of equipment carts. But during the late hours, the station seemed to breathe more slowly. The hum of the translation cores became clearer, almost rhythmic, like a vast mechanical heart. Marcus had discovered that this was when Kyreth worked most comfortably. He arrived in the linguistic wing, carrying 2 cups of synthesized coffee, carefully balanced, and found her already there, seated at the projection table. Pale streams of light floated in front of her, forming layered columns of text that rearranged themselves as she studied them. Her long ears angled slightly forward, a posture Marcus had begun to recognize as deep concentration. "You're early," he said quietly. Kyreth startled only slightly this time, which Marcus considered progress. "I could not sleep," she replied. Marcus set one of the cups near her. "I wasn't sure if Scytherans drink coffee, but this one is mostly harmless. Probably." Kyreth examined the cup cautiously, as though it might attempt to escape. "What does it do?" she asked. "It makes humans believe they are intelligent and productive," Marcus said. "The effect usually wears off after about 4 hours." A faint smile touched her lips. She took a careful sip, then blinked. "It is bitter. That means it's working." They settled into their work, the quiet broken only by the soft chime of the translation systems. Tonight they were studying fragments recovered from a derelict survey vessel that had drifted for nearly a century before being salvaged. The data logs were written in a hybrid trade language, layered with personal annotations and symbols that shifted meaning depending on context. Marcus frowned at one passage. "This line, does it actually say the stars taste like iron? Or is the translator being poetic again?" Kyreth leaned closer, studying the text. "It is literal," she said. "The author was describing radiation saturation in the upper atmosphere of a red dwarf system." Marcus blinked. "I have to admit, the stars taste like iron sounds much more dramatic." Kyreth considered this, then said softly, "Perhaps scientists should write more dramatically." "Please don't encourage them," Marcus said. "If astrophysicists start writing poetry, we'll never get them to finish their reports." Kyreth let out a quiet laugh, then quickly lowered her eyes as if embarrassed by the sound. Marcus pretended not to notice, giving her the small courtesy of normalcy. Hours passed in the slow, immersive rhythm of research. At one point, a maintenance drone drifted into the room, paused as if contemplating the two of them, then emitted a polite tone and began cleaning the far wall with unnecessary enthusiasm. Marcus watched it for a moment. I'm convinced those things judge us. Kyreth glanced at the drone. Judge? Yes, Marcus said solemnly. It's probably thinking, look at these organic life forms, still incapable of cleaning their own walls. Kyreth followed his gaze, and for a moment her expression grew thoughtful. Perhaps it is correct. Marcus sighed. I regret teaching you sarcasm. The work drew them deeper into the recovered logs. The survey crew had encountered a series of ancient orbital structures, vast rings of dark metal drifting around a dead star. The inscriptions carved into the rings were partially preserved in the logs, their meanings fragmented but haunting. They spoke of a civilization that had tried to preserve its knowledge by encoding language into the very structure of matter. Kyreth's eyes shone with quiet fascination as she reconstructed one of the phrases, her fingers moving delicately through the holographic symbols. It is beautiful, she murmured, almost to herself. Marcus looked at her rather than the text. There was something in the way she spoke when she forgot to be shy, a quiet intensity that made the room seem smaller, more intimate. It is, he said. Kyreth nodded, still focused on the projection. Marcus hesitated, then added almost absent-mindedly, You know, you are too. The words slipped out with the same casual tone he might have used to comment on a sunset or an elegant equation. He did not think about them until the silence that followed stretched far too long. Kyreth froze. It was not a subtle reaction. One moment she was moving fluidly through the symbols, and the next she was completely still, as if someone had paused her in mid-motion. Slowly, very slowly, the faint blue tint of her skin deepened, spreading across her cheeks and the tips of her ears in a rich, unmistakable flush. Marcus blinked. Are you all right? Kyreth opened her mouth, closed it again, and then made a small, helpless sound that the translator failed entirely to interpret. She lowered her head so quickly that a strand of her dark hair fell forward, and she reached for her data pad, holding it in front of her face like a shield. Marcus stared, realizing with dawning horror what he had just done. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I just meant, well, I meant what I said, but I didn't mean to say it like that. Or at that moment. Or possibly at all. I'm not helping, am I? Kyreth shook her head rapidly, still hiding behind the data pad. Her ears were now a deep shade of indigo. I do not understand, she managed at last, her voice barely audible. Which part? Marcus asked gently. All of it, she whispered. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. All right, that's fair. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The translation chorus hummed softly, and somewhere in the distance, a door slid open and closed. Finally, Kyreth lowered the data pad slightly, just enough that one eye was visible. Why would you say that? She asked. Marcus considered the question. Because it's true, he said simply. The silence that followed was different from before. Not awkward, but fragile, like a thin layer of ice forming on still water. Kyreth looked down again, her fingers tightening around the edge of the pad. No one has ever said that to me, she said quietly. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a quiet realization that his careless words had touched something far deeper than he had intended. Well, he said softly, then they were all blind. Kyreth made a small sound, halfway between a laugh and a protest, and the color in her face deepened again. To ease the tension, Marcus gestured toward the projection. We should probably get back to work before the ancient civilization decides we're unworthy of their language. Kyreth nodded, though it took her a moment to compose herself. When she finally resumed her work, her movements were slower, more deliberate, as if she were acutely aware of Marcus's presence in a way she had not been before. The hours slipped by, quiet and thoughtful. From time to time, Marcus caught her glancing at him, then quickly looking away, her ears flicking faintly in embarrassment. Outside the observation window, the storms of the gas giant rolled on in silent spirals, and inside the quiet glow of the linguistic wing, two researchers continued their work. one wondering if he had said too much, the other wondering why a few simple words had changed the way the universe felt. The next few days passed in a quiet, delicate rhythm that neither Marcus nor Kyreth seemed willing to disturb. They continued to work together in the linguistic wing, often during the late cycles when the station was nearly silent. Yet something had changed, subtle but unmistakable, like a shift in the gravity of a room that no one could measure, but everyone could feel. Kyreth still spoke softly, still avoided long eye contact, but she no longer seemed quite as tense when Marcus entered the room. Sometimes she would glance up before he even spoke, as if she had begun to anticipate his presence. And sometimes when he said something mildly ridiculous, which he did with alarming frequency, she would smile without trying to hide it. Marcus, for his part, was more careful with his words now. He did not regret what he had said that night, but he understood that for Kyreth, words carried weight in ways he had not fully grasped before. One evening they were working on a series of audio fragments recovered from an ancient relay buoy. The recordings were heavily distorted, full of static and faint, rhythmic pulses that resembled speech but followed no known linguistic structure. Marcus leaned back in his chair, listening to one of the fragments loop for the fifth time. "It sounds like someone tapping on a metal wall with a spoon," he said. Kyreth adjusted the waveform display. "It is structured," she replied. "There is repetition every 8.2 seconds. It may be a harmonic language." Marcus frowned. "You mean they were talking in music?" "Possibly." Marcus listened again, then said, "If humans tried that, most of us would be fluent in elevator music." Kyreth looked at him, puzzled. "Elevator music? It's a long story," Marcus said, "and not a very good one." A faint laugh escaped her before she could stop it. She quickly lowered her head, but Marcus noticed that she did not seem as embarrassed as before. The sound of her laughter lingered in the quiet room, soft and warm. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Outside the observation window, maintenance drones drifted past like slow-moving stars, their lights blinking in steady patterns. Marcus glanced at Kyreth. She was concentrating on the waveform display, her long ears tilted slightly forward, her expression thoughtful. He realized, not for the first time, that there was something profoundly calming about her presence. She moved carefully, spoke carefully, listened carefully. In a station full of hurried voices and constant noise, she was like a still point in the middle of a storm. "Kyreth," he said after a while. She looked up. "Yes? Can I ask you something? You don't have to answer if you don't want to." She hesitated, then nodded. "Why do you work so late?" he asked. "I mean, I know you said you prefer the quiet, but most people prefer quiet without giving up sleep entirely." Kyreth looked down at the console, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the panel. For a moment, Marcus thought she might not answer. "During the day," she said softly, "there are many people, many voices, many expectations." She paused, searching for the right words. "It is difficult to be seen." Marcus frowned slightly. "Difficult to be seen?" Kyreth nodded. "In Scytheran academic circles, discussions are loud, competitive. The most confident voices are heard first. I was never loud." Marcus considered this. "But you're one of the best linguists on this station." "That does not always matter," she said quietly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "For what it's worth, I hear you." Kyreth looked up at him, surprised. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, as if the intensity of the moment had become too much, Marcus added, "Also, you're the only person here who hasn't tried to convince me that semicolons are a form of moral failure, so that helps." Kyreth blinked. "Semicolons? There's a whole faction in the documentation department," Marcus said gravely. "They believe semicolons are an abomination. I'm fairly sure they're planning a crusade." Kyreth covered her mouth, laughing softly. The sound was freer now, less hesitant, and Marcus felt a quiet sense of relief. They returned to their work, analyzing the harmonic patterns in the transmission. Kyreth began mapping the pulses into a three-dimensional model, the symbols forming delicate spirals in the air. Marcus watched as the structure unfolded, intricate and precise. "You see," she said, her voice gaining a hint of excitement, "the repetition is not linear. It folds back on itself, like a Mobius strip. The meaning may depend on the listener's position in time. Marcus stared at the projection. That's beautiful, he said. Kyreth froze for a fraction of a second, and Marcus immediately realized what he had done. I mean the structure, he added quickly. Kyreth's ears twitched, and to his surprise, she smiled. A small, shy smile, but unmistakably amused. I know, she said. Marcus blinked. You do? Yes. He leaned back, exhaling in relief. Good, because I'm running out of ways to explain myself without sounding like an idiot. Kyreth tilted her head slightly. You are not an idiot. That's very kind of you to say, Marcus replied. My former physics instructor would disagree. The hours slipped by. At one point, the station lights flickered briefly as the power grid shifted to accommodate a passing cargo convoy. The projections dimmed, and for a moment the room was lit only by the distant glow of the gas giant outside. Kyreth looked toward the window, her expression thoughtful. Do you ever feel, she said slowly, that the universe is too large? Marcus followed her gaze. The storms below churned in silent majesty, lightning flickering deep within the clouds. All the time, and he said, but I also think that's what makes it interesting. If it were small, we'd run out of things to wonder about. Kyreth considered this, then nodded. After a while, she said very quietly, I am glad you are here. Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest, unexpected and steady. I'm glad too, he said. They sat in silence after that, listening to the faint hum of the station and the distant echo of ancient voices carried across centuries in fragments of sound and light. And though neither of them said it aloud, both of them felt that something fragile and important was beginning to take shape between them. Something as delicate as the harmonic language they were deciphering, and just as full of hidden meaning. The linguistic wing was busier than usual that cycle. A diplomatic transport had arrived, bringing researchers and cultural envoys from 3 different systems, and the quiet corridors now carried unfamiliar voices, the air filled with overlapping dialects and the faint chirping tones of portable translators working overtime. Marcus noticed the change immediately, not because of the noise itself, but because of Kyreth. She moved more carefully when others were nearby, her shoulders tightening, her voice fading to a near whisper whenever someone addressed her. During a briefing that morning, Marcus had watched her present a translation analysis to a small group of scholars. Her work was precise, elegant, and deeply insightful. Yet she spoke so softly that one of the envoys leaned forward and asked her to repeat every sentence. By the time the meeting ended, Kyreth looked exhausted, as if she had been holding her breath the entire time. That evening, she retreated to the archives earlier than usual. Marcus found her seated at a projection table, surrounded by drifting glyphs, the room dim except for the pale blue glow of the displays. Rough day, he asked gently. Kyreth glanced up, then nodded. Many voices, she said. Marcus sat down across from her. I noticed. For a while they worked in silence, analyzing fragments from an ancient star chart encoded in a form of symbolic mathematics. The chart described gravitational anomalies in a system that no longer existed, its star having collapsed centuries ago. The data was incomplete, but Kyreth seemed fascinated by it, tracing the paths of vanished planets as if she could still see them. After some time, Marcus said, Can I ask you something? You don't have to answer. Kyreth looked at him cautiously. Yes. Do you ever get angry? He asked. She blinked. Angry? Yes. Frustrated, annoyed, furious with the universe. The usual. Kyreth considered this for a long moment. I do not think I am good at being angry. Marcus smiled faintly. That's probably healthier than my approach. What is your approach? I argue with inanimate objects, he said. Last week I lost an argument with a door. Kyreth tilted her head. How does one lose an argument with a door? It refused to open, Marcus said gravely. Very stubborn door. A quiet laugh escaped her, easing some of the tension in her posture. They continued working, the gentle rhythm of their collaboration returning. At one point, Kyreth activated a 3-dimensional reconstruction of the lost star system. The projection filled the air above the table, ghostly spheres of light marking the orbits of planets that no longer existed. Marcus leaned forward, watching the slow rotation. "It's strange," he said. "All of this, gone. Entire worlds, entire civilizations. And the only thing left is a fragment of data drifting through space." Kyreth's gaze remained on the projection. "Not entirely gone," she said softly. "As long as someone remembers, something remains." Marcus looked at her, sensing that she was speaking about more than ancient star systems. "Kyreth," he said after a moment, "can I ask you something else?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Back when I said what I said, you seemed surprised, more than surprised. Why?" Kyreth's fingers stilled on the console. The projection continued to rotate above them, silent and luminous. "In my culture," she said slowly, "attention is unevenly distributed. Those who speak loudly, who compete, who draw attention, they are seen. The rest are not." Marcus frowned. "That's unfair." "Yes," she said simply. He waited, sensing there was more. "I was always quiet," Kyreth continued. "I preferred listening, observing, studying. Others advanced more quickly. They were noticed. I was useful, but not remarkable." Marcus shook his head. "That's ridiculous. You're one of the most remarkable people I've ever met." Kyreth looked down, the faintest trace of color rising along her cheeks. "You are kind." "I'm serious," Marcus said. "You see patterns no one else notices. You understand languages that don't even exist anymore. And you laugh at my terrible jokes, which requires an extraordinary level of patience." That last remark drew a small smile from her. For a while, neither of them spoke. The projection above them shifted, the ghostly orbits aligning in a delicate geometric pattern. Finally, Kyreth said quietly, "When you said I was beautiful, I thought you were mistaken." Marcus blinked. "Mistaken?" "Yes. I thought perhaps you were speaking about the projection or the work or anything else. And when you realized I wasn't," Kyreth hesitated, "I did not know what to think." Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering this. "Well," he said gently, "for the record, I wasn't mistaken." Kyreth's ears tilted slightly backward, a gesture Marcus had come to recognize as embarrassment. But she did not look away this time. She met his gaze for a brief, steady moment before lowering her eyes again. To lighten the mood, Marcus gestured toward the projection. "Besides, if we're talking about beauty, I'm fairly sure this lost star system has us both beaten." Kyreth looked up, following his gaze, and a soft laugh escaped her. "Perhaps." They returned to their work, the conversation lingering in the air like a quiet echo. The station lights dimmed gradually as the night cycle deepened, and the distant hum of the engines seemed softer, almost soothing. At one point, a service drone drifted into the room carrying a tray of nutrient packs. It paused, emitted a polite chime, and extended the tray toward them. Marcus examined one of the packs. "Flavored algae paste," he read. "My favorite." Kyreth looked at the label. "It is not so bad." "You say that," Marcus replied, "but humans have a long and complicated relationship with food that resembles pond residue." Kyreth covered her mouth, laughing softly again. They ate in companionable silence, watching the projection slowly fade as the system completed its reconstruction cycle. After a while, Kyreth said, almost hesitantly, "Marcus, may I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you not uncomfortable with me?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Why would I be?" "I am quiet," she said. "Awkward. I do not always know what to say." Marcus considered this, then said simply, "Neither do I. I just talk anyway." Kyreth looked at him, puzzled, then smiled faintly. "I am glad," she said quietly, "that you do." Outside the observation window, the distant storms of the gas giant shimmered with silent lightning, illuminating the darkness in brief pale flashes. And inside the quiet archives, two figures sat side by side, surrounded by the fading echoes of lost stars, speaking softly in the language of patience and growing understanding. The assignment arrived during the morning cycle. transmitted quietly into Marcus's console as a routine research directive. He almost ignored it at first, assuming it was another archival review or translation request. But when he opened the file, he straightened in his chair. A survey drone had recently mapped a small moon orbiting one of the outer bodies in the system, and the scans had revealed something unusual: geometric formations embedded in the cliffs of a crystalline valley, formations that resembled inscriptions on a monumental scale. The linguistic division had been asked to send two specialists to conduct a preliminary analysis on site. Marcus looked across the workspace at Kyreth. She was studying a fragment of harmonic notation, her expression calm but focused, unaware that their routine was about to change. "Kyreth," he said. She looked up. "Yes? How do you feel about fieldwork?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Fieldwork?" "Yes, as in leaving this room, boarding a shuttle, and standing somewhere that does not contain translation cores or nutrient paste." Kyreth hesitated. "I have limited experience with such environments." "That's a very polite way of saying you prefer quiet rooms," Marcus said. She lowered her gaze. "Yes." Marcus slid the console toward her, displaying the images from the drone. The valley appeared in pale, shimmering tones, its walls rising in smooth arcs of crystal that reflected the distant light of the system's star. Along the surfaces, enormous lines and symbols were carved, some stretching for hundreds of meters. Kyreth leaned closer, her eyes sharpening with interest. The hesitation in her posture faded as she studied the formations, and Marcus saw the familiar transformation, the shy, uncertain woman giving way to the brilliant linguist. "These are not random," she said softly. "They are structured, repetitive sequences, layered meanings. This could be a linguistic archive." Marcus smiled. "I had a feeling you'd say yes." Kyreth blinked. "I did not say yes. You didn't have to." A faint smile touched her lips. 2 days later, they stood in the cargo bay beside a small survey shuttle, watching technicians secure equipment crates. The shuttle's hull gleamed under the bay lights, its engines emitting a low, steady vibration. Kyreth stood very still, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. Marcus noticed the tension in her shoulders. "Nervous?" he asked gently. "Yes," she admitted. "Me too," Marcus said, "but mostly because I once spilled coffee in a shuttle cockpit and nearly caused an interdepartmental incident." Kyreth looked at him. "That is not reassuring." "It's honest," Marcus said. The shuttle ride was smoother than Marcus expected. The pilot, a quiet woman named Elian, guided them through the upper atmosphere of the moon with practiced ease. Outside the viewport, the landscape unfolded in shades of silver and pale violet, the crystalline terrain reflecting the sunlight in dazzling patterns. Kyreth sat near the window, silent, her eyes wide as she watched the surface approach. Marcus realized she was not afraid now. She was fascinated. When they landed in the valley, the airlock opened to reveal a world of stillness. The air was thin but breathable, cool against Marcus's skin. The cliffs rose around them like frozen waves, their surfaces etched with immense lines that caught the light in shifting colors. Kyreth stepped forward slowly, looking up at the carvings. For a long moment, she said nothing. "It's beautiful," Marcus said quietly. "Yes," Kyreth whispered. They spent hours documenting the inscriptions, scanning sections of the cliff and recording structural patterns. The symbols were unlike any Marcus had seen, curving lines intersected by precise geometric nodes, arranged in sequences that seemed to spiral outward across the rock. At one point, Marcus attempted to climb a low ridge to get a better angle for a scan and promptly slipped on the smooth crystalline surface, landing in a most undignified manner. Kyreth hurried over. "Are you injured?" "Only my pride," Marcus said, wincing as he stood, "which fortunately is not a vital organ." Kyreth covered her mouth, laughing softly, the sound echoing faintly in the vast stillness of the valley. As the sun dipped lower, the light changed, and the carvings began to glow faintly, as if the crystal itself were storing energy and releasing it in slow pulses. The lines illuminated in sequence, forming patterns that moved like waves across the cliffs. Kyreth stared in awe. "It is reactive," she said. "The inscriptions respond to the angle of the light. The meaning may change depending on the time of day. Marcus watched the glowing patterns. So it's a language that moves. Yes, she said, a language written in time. They stood there in silence, watching the valley come alive with light. Later, as they sat near the shuttle eating ration packs, the sky above them deepened to a rich indigo, and unfamiliar stars began to appear. Kyreth looked up, her expression thoughtful. I used to think, she said slowly, that the universe was too vast for someone like me to matter. Marcus glanced at her. And now? She considered the question. Now I think, perhaps it is vast enough that everyone matters somewhere. Marcus smiled faintly. I like that theory. A faint breeze moved through the valley, carrying a soft, resonant tone as it passed over the crystal formations, like the distant sound of chimes. Kyreth listened, her head tilted slightly. Do you hear that? Yes, Marcus said. It sounds like the moon is singing. Kyreth smiled, a quiet, luminous expression that Marcus realized he had never seen before. Unself-conscious, unguarded, entirely genuine. And in that moment, sitting beneath an alien sky, while the Valley of Crystal sang softly in the wind, Marcus understood that their journey had already begun to change both of them in ways neither had expected. The return to Asterion felt quieter than usual, though the station itself had not changed. The same corridors curved in silent arcs, the same distant hum of reactors vibrated through the structure, and the same endless drift of stars surrounded the observation decks. Yet for Marcus and Kyreth, something subtle had shifted, like a melody heard once and then recognized everywhere. They carried their surveyed data back into the linguistic wing, where the crystalline inscriptions were reconstructed in holographic form. Entire walls filled with luminous patterns, the glowing sequences slowly cycling as the system simulated the shifting light of the moon sky. Kyreth stood in the center of the projection, turning slowly, studying the living language around her. Marcus watched her from the edge of the room. She moved differently now, not dramatically, but with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. She still spoke softly, still avoided crowded rooms when she could, but there was a steadiness in her movements, as if she no longer felt quite so invisible. You were right, Marcus said. Kyreth turned. About what? It is a language written in time. The translation algorithms are starting to recognize temporal patterns in the sequences. Whoever created this, they weren't just writing, they were composing. Kyreth's eyes brightened. A language meant to be experienced, not merely read. Marcus nodded. Exactly. They worked late into the night cycle, analyzing the patterns, mapping the relationships between light, geometry, and meaning. At one point, Marcus activated a simulation that accelerated the sequence, causing the glowing symbols to pulse rapidly, forming shifting spirals of light. Kyreth stared, entranced. It is like watching thought itself. Marcus leaned back in his chair. I wish my thoughts looked that organized. Kyreth glanced at him. Are they not? Not even slightly, Marcus said. If my thoughts were visualized, it would look like a maintenance closet after a small explosion. Kyreth laughed softly, the sound echoing faintly through the chamber. Later, as the station lights dimmed, Marcus noticed that Kyreth seemed distracted. She was studying the projection, but her movements were slower, her focus drifting. Something on your mind? He asked gently. Kyreth hesitated, then said quietly, There are discussions happening. What kind of discussions? About the expedition, she said, and about us. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Us? Kyreth nodded, looking down at the console. Some of the researchers, they talk. They wonder why I was chosen for the mission. They think I am too quiet, too hesitant. Marcus felt a flicker of irritation. That's ridiculous. You were chosen because you're the best person for the work. Kyreth gave a faint, uncertain smile. Not everyone sees it that way. Marcus leaned forward. Do you? She looked at him surprised. Do you see it that way? He repeated. Kyreth was silent for a moment. I am trying to. Marcus nodded slowly. That's enough. The silence that followed was comfortable, but thoughtful, like the pause between movements in a piece of music. To lighten the mood, Marcus gestured toward the projection. Besides, if anyone questions your qualifications, just show them this. If they still doubt you, I'll explain to them how the translation works. That should confuse them long enough for us to escape. Kyreth smiled faintly. You would do that? Absolutely. I have a long history of confusing people. They returned to their work, but Marcus noticed that Kyreth's posture had relaxed slightly, as if the weight on her mind had lessened. A few hours later, the station experienced a minor power fluctuation. The projections flickered, the lights dimmed, and for a moment the room was lit only by the faint glow of emergency strips along the floor. Kyreth looked up, her ears tilting slightly. Is that normal? Mostly, Marcus said. Asterion likes to remind us it's not perfect. As if on cue, a maintenance drone drifted into the room, emitted an apologetic chime, and began inspecting a wall panel with exaggerated seriousness. Marcus folded his arms. There it is, the station's official apology committee. Kyreth covered her mouth, laughing softly. The lights returned a moment later, and the projection stabilized. The glowing symbols resumed their slow, graceful motion, filling the room with shifting light. Kyreth watched them in silence, then said quietly, Marcus, may I tell you something? Of course. When you first spoke to me, she said, I thought you were only being polite. I thought you would forget me, as others have. Marcus frowned slightly. That would have been difficult. Why? Because you're impossible to forget, he said simply. Kyreth looked down, the faint blue flush returning to her cheeks, but this time she did not hide. I am still not used to hearing such things, she admitted. That's all right, Marcus said gently. You don't have to get used to it all at once. They sat in silence for a while, the quiet hum of the station surrounding them. Outside the observation window, a cargo convoy passed, its engines glowing like distant comets as it moved toward the outer docks. The stars beyond seemed impossibly clear, scattered across the darkness like fragments of shattered glass. Kyreth followed Marcus's gaze. When I was young, she said softly, I used to think the stars were watching us. Marcus smiled faintly. I still think that sometimes. Kyreth glanced at him. Does it not trouble you? No, Marcus said. It reminds me that we're part of something larger, and that somewhere out there, someone might be looking back. Kyreth was quiet for a moment, then nodded. They returned to their work, the glowing language continuing to unfold around them, each sequence revealing new layers of meaning. And though neither of them spoke of it aloud, both felt that the distance between them had grown smaller. Not in space, but in understanding, in trust, and in the quiet certainty that they were no longer walking their separate paths alone. The translation was completed during the quietest hour of the night cycle. Marcus did not realize at first what Kyreth had discovered. She was standing very still in the center of the projection chamber, surrounded by the slow, luminous spirals of the crystalline language, her eyes fixed on a sequence that pulsed more brightly than the others. I understand it, she said softly. Marcus looked up from his console. All of it? Not all, she replied, but enough. He stepped closer, watching as the symbols rearranged themselves, the temporal layers aligning into a coherent structure. What had once seemed like scattered fragments now formed a flowing narrative, a record left by a civilization that had known its star was dying and had chosen to preserve not only its knowledge, but its thoughts, its memories, and its hopes in a language that would survive as long as light touched the crystal. It isn't just information, Marcus said quietly. No, Kyreth replied. It is a message. She activated the final translation layer. The projection shifted, the spirals unfolding into a sequence of words rendered in the station's standard script. To those who find this, we were here. We wondered. We lived. Remember us. The chamber fell silent. Marcus exhaled slowly. That's simple. Yes, Kyreth said, and profound. They stood there for a long moment, watching the glowing message repeat, the ancient voices echoing across centuries. Finally, Marcus said, You did it. Kyreth shook her head gently. We did it. Marcus smiled. All right, we did it. Word of the discovery spread quickly through the station. For once, the discussions in the academic halls were not competitive, but filled with genuine excitement. Researchers came to see the reconstruction, and even those who had once dismissed Kyreth listened in quiet respect as she explained the structure of the language. Marcus watched her during one of the presentations. Her voice was still soft, but it no longer trembled. She spoke with calm certainty, answering questions without lowering her gaze. The transformation was not dramatic, not theatrical, but it was unmistakable. After the presentation, as the crowd dispersed, Kyreth found Marcus in the observation corridor. I was afraid, she admitted, before speaking. You didn't look afraid, Marcus said. I was, she said simply, but I spoke anyway. Marcus nodded. That's what courage usually looks like. They stood side by side, watching the gas giant turn slowly below, its storms glowing faintly in the reflected light of the distant sun. Marcus, Kyreth said after a moment, may I ask you something? Of course. Why did you speak to me that first day? Marcus considered the question. Because you were there, he said, and because you looked like someone who had been waiting a long time for someone to speak to her. Kyreth was silent for a moment. I was, she said quietly. A maintenance drone drifted past them, paused, and emitted a cheerful tone before continuing down the corridor. Marcus folded his arms. I'm fairly sure that drone likes you. Kyreth tilted her head. Why? It never beeps cheerfully at me. Perhaps it recognizes competence, she said, and for a moment Marcus stared at her in mock astonishment. Was that a joke? He asked. Kyreth's ears flicked slightly. Perhaps, Marcus laughed. You're getting dangerous. Days passed and the work on the crystalline language concluded. The findings were transmitted to research institutes across the network, and Asterion received commendations for the discovery. Kyreth's name appeared first in the official reports. One evening, long after the celebrations had faded and the station had returned to its quiet routines, Marcus and Kyreth sat once more in the archives, the room dim and peaceful. It felt very much like the night they had first worked together, yet everything was different. Kyreth looked at the empty projection table, then at Marcus. I have been thinking, she said slowly, about what that message meant. Remember us. Marcus nodded. I've been thinking about it too. I think, Kyreth said, that remembering is a way of continuing, of refusing to let something vanish completely. Marcus looked at her, understanding what she meant but letting her finish. When you told me I was beautiful, she said quietly, you helped me remember something I had forgotten, that I mattered. Marcus felt the words settle in the quiet air between them. I only told the truth, he said gently. Kyreth met his gaze, her expression steady, no longer uncertain. So did they, she said, gesturing faintly toward the silent consoles that held the memory of a vanished civilization. They told the truth about themselves, and now they are not forgotten. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of the station. Then Marcus said, There's something I've been meaning to tell you. Kyreth looked at him, curiosity in her eyes. Marcus hesitated, then said simply, Working with you has changed me. I used to rush through everything, every assignment, every conversation. I thought efficiency was the same as living. Kyreth listened quietly. But you, Marcus continued, you notice things, small things, patterns, moments. You take time to understand. I think I'm learning to do that too. Kyreth's expression softened. And you, she said, have changed me. I am still shy. I think I always will be. But I am no longer afraid to be seen. Marcus smiled. That sounds like progress. Yes, she said. It is. Outside the observation window, the stars burned steadily, silent and eternal. Somewhere far away, the crystalline valley on the moon continued to glow with the shifting light of its ancient language, repeating its message to the universe. We were here. We wondered. We lived. Remember us. And in the quiet of the station, two figures sat side by side, no longer strangers, no longer uncertain of their place in the vastness of space, but certain of something smaller and perhaps more important. That in the endless expanse of the universe, they had found one another, and that was enough.